In this edition of Fintech Friday, we are going to talk about the implications of the federal court ruling against the OCC's plan of a national charter for fintech players.
I mean, first things first. What exactly happened here with this recent ruling against the OCC charter?
So OCC was planning to create a national banking charter for fintech players who wanted to become banks, especially deposit-taking banks, so that they don't have to go through state-by-state regulatory mechanism. Because typically in US, if you want to open up a bank or get a banking license, then you have to apply in multiple states, and you're also regulated by multiple state regulators.
So, what does the OCC ruling really mean for the fintech industry specifically?
See, there are two aspects to it. Obviously, the aspiration of fintech players to become a nationally chartered bank, especially a digital bank, has now been stopped. That won't happen. The way the world is moving is in a totally different direction. While US still wants to maintain the status quo in terms of regulation and also the compliance, and that I think will be a big issue for a lot of fintech players if any of them wants to become a bank.
What's the next step for fintechs now that the charter's going through the appeals process?
So I think one good thing in US is the capital markets are very deep. So a lot of fintech players will not become banks and they will continue what they are doing today as non-banks. It will actually lead to, I would, in my view, even more disintermediation of the banking space than less, because now the big asset managers and the big, pension funds and other folks will actually start moving directly into this space in partnership with fintech players. I think which is good and bad for regulators, because the good thing is, okay, they can control the banks, but the bad thing is that a lot of the consumers and businesses are moving digital. They will move to those platforms which offer the best digital experience, whether they are banks or non-banks. There will be a more pressure on the banking industry actually, and it will not be less pressure, because now banks can get more deposits, but they cannot lend money.
Many banks will probably be thinking about this ruling as a favorable opportunity for them. What's your advice, though, for banks on their next steps?
I think in the short term, yes, banks will get more breathing space, but at the same point of time, the force of the technology change and the digital changes that are coming, they are like just unstoppable anymore. You cannot stop them. You cannot fight them. You have to adapt to it. You have to adopt it. So I think for a lot of banks, actually, it's a good time as they're getting a breathing space to actually redouble their efforts to go digital, and not like slack off and say that okay, this gives me a competitive regulatory edge and I can just go and maintain it.
What does all of this mean for Biz2Credit?
Yeah, so we as a company, we are a marketplace lender. So obviously, we didn't have any aspirations to become a bank. On the Biz2X side, we are already empowering and partnering with a lot of banks. So I think that is going to even accelerate more now, because banks need to go digital faster. They need to lower their costs. They need to control for risk a lot better. There is a significant amount of risk that US will fall behind. A lack of regulatory, framework and lack of regulatory transparency on this issue will lead to, no open banking. There won't be digital only banks right now for the time being. That means that we have already seen what has happened in China. China have already built some very large fintech companies. We are seeing that has started to happen in India. Canada is already thinking about it. So I think the world is moving in that direction very quickly, and if US doesn't take those steps, we will, like our fintech industry will actually suffer. So my take is that this ruling against the OCC National Bank Charter should not be seen as a victory by banks or defeat by fintechs. It should actually lead to more collaboration between banks and fintechs, so that US as an economy can keep driving the innovation up, lower the cost of access to credit, increase the financial inclusion, and maintain our competitive edge against China and other economies in Asia and Europe.